Before I begin speaking on the free trade area of the Americas, or free trade against America, as I like to call it, is that too much?
No, you're fine.
All right. By the way, I was a cheerleader in college, so my voice kind of projects. Anyway, the free trade against America, as I like to call it, the topic of sovereignty needs to be considered. I find very few people ever address this topic, except perhaps members of the John Birch Society or other like-minded Americans. But I believe that almost every single person who is conscious understands the concept of sovereignty, even if they don't acknowledge it. For over 50 years, I have had the opportunity to see the gamut of society come through our amusement park. I have observed that as soon as the toddler is either able to cry or talk, they know how to say no, and they learn that really fast. Those babies understand sovereignty. No, no, no. It has to be one of the first words they learn. Now, as we mature from childhood to adolescence and on to adulthood and old age, we are constantly trying to assert our personal sovereignty, even though most people are not even conscious of the concept. The tugging on the apron strings by the adolescent, or the tugging on the bars of a jail by a rightfully or wrongfully convicted individual, are both manifestations of people trying to obtain or regain their personal sovereignty. And where did this sovereignty come from? Of course, it is given equally to all men by God. He created everything, and He gave us our rights. There are no constitutional rights. I repeat, there are no constitutional rights. There are only rights protected by the U.S. Constitution. We, or our forefathers, created government. We created the Constitution to defend and protect the rights given to us by our Creator. In our Declaration of Independence of July 4th, 1776, we declared ourselves free and independent of Britain and its monarchy. We were declaring ourselves sovereign. If you look at your copy of the Declaration, and you all should have one, you look at the first paragraph. It recognizes that God has given man rights. In the second paragraph, it states that all men are created equal and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That is, government can't legally take them away. It further states that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving these just powers from the consent of the governed. In the ensuing paragraphs, it lists the tyrannical actions of the British monarchy against the citizens of the colonies. In the last paragraph of the Declaration, it appeals to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, and it ends with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. In truth, our Declaration of Independence is a prayer. It is a devout petition to God. Those signers, our representatives, mutually pledged their lives, fortunes, and their sacred honor. How can we do less? In the last paragraph, the phrase independent states is used 3 times. Thus, we were declaring our sovereignty and appealing to God in the process. In the last paragraph of the Constitution, it declares, quote, adopted by unanimous consent of the states present, the 17th of September, in the year of our Lord, 1787. Does this mean the Constitution is unconstitutional according to the Ninth Circuit? All right, now what does that... What does that have to do with the free trade area of the Americas? Everything. Because the FTAA is about us losing our sovereignty. The first summit of the Americas was held in December of 1994 in Miami, Florida. The insider's goal was the creation of a free trade area comprised of the countries in the Western Hemisphere, supposedly for the elimination of trade barriers. They referred to it as one community and of a full economic integration of that community. They also called for the eradication of poverty and discrimination and listed were the catchwords protection of the environment and sustainable development. They claimed their decisions would be based by consensus, majority rule, and that all rules and regulations would be governed by the WTO, the World Trade Organization. The question is begged, what if your nation disagrees? No constraints were placed on this attempt at regional government. No checks and balances like those provided in the U.S. Constitution. Now, what would be our lot if all questions related to trade were to be decided by a government of the Americas? Powers would not be limited by our Constitution, but delegated by a multinational organization whose headquarters would conceivably be beyond our present borders. They also called for a rotation of the presidency of this new government. Trade ministers would decide what constitutes trade or what affects trade. Look at how our own federal government now believes it has a right to regulate everything. Why would a multinational organization that disregards the checks and balances of our U.S. Constitution have any qualms about directing all our activities? The FTAA plan to merge the United States, Canada, and Latin America into a Western Hemispheric government would be patterned after the European Union. This regional government would be called a common market for the Americas, with a common currency and constitution. It would not be developed all at once, but gradually by a piecemeal process. Fidel Castro, in a speech delivered on May 2nd, 1959, to an Inter-American Economic Conference in Buenos Aires, urged the United States to join in the creation of a so-called Latin American Common Market. He called for the U.S. to pledge $30 billion for 10 years. Now, less than 2 years later, President John Kennedy put forth his Alliance for Progress, pledging $10 billion for 10 years. Later, President Lyndon Johnson promised another $10 billion for the same period. Castro was either a prophet or an insider. Following the 9/11 2001 attacks, Castro hosted a global terror summit in Havana that included representatives from, as President Bush describes them, the axis of evil regimes and top terrorist groups. President George Bush is leading point on this quest to surrender our national sovereignty to an international trade group. President Bush signed a commitment with the same leaders at the Quebec Summit of the Americas in 2001, with complete negotiations to be accomplished by 2005, this year. You've seen how big business seems to be behind this surrender of our sovereignty. Why would big business want more regulatory bureaucracy, especially one that would be shielded from local, state, or federal control? Big businesses have deeper pockets. They have fewer loyalties to local communities. They are better equipped financially, politically, and legally to influence multinational organizations like the WTO, NAFTA, or FTAA. They could care less about small business. On the other hand, small business's main influence is through their own government, local, state, and federal. Small business, the bulk of business in the United States, would be crowded out. It would be non-competitive, non-effective. In 2001 at the Quebec Summit, in which President Bush was a star player, much was made about the loss of sovereignty. Bush said to these assembled heads of state that they should combine in a common market. You remember what Castro said? May 2nd, 1959? The same thing. Castro was just 42 years ahead of Bush. Would we be a sovereign nation if we allowed nations like Brazil and Argentina, acting through their own representatives in the FTAA, to regulate how much we charge for beef or fertilizer or timber? Should Colombia, Bolivia, Peru, or Panama be telling us how much we can export or import, or what we inspect or not inspect that comes in or through our borders? Should Florida orange juice or grapefruits from Texas be controlled by communist leaders like Hugo Chavez of Venezuela or Lula da Silva of Brazil? Do you know that presently there is a 29-cent per gallon charge, a tariff, on all imported orange juice, and that this could be eliminated? If that were eliminated, what would happen to our domestic orange crop? The foreign juice would be 29 cents a gallon cheaper. Would you want foreign nations or groups like NAFTA, FTAA, the WTO, or the European Union controlling the way we tax our industries? That is one of the key points. Taxing policies would not be determined by our Congress unless it is okayed by the FTAA or its successors. How crazy is that? This is a direct violation of Articles 1, Sections 7 and 8 of the U.S. Constitution. Only the U.S. House of Representatives has this prerogative. In the 2nd century, Tacitus, a Roman historian, said this, quote, "The more corrupt the state, the more numerous the laws," unquote. Then consider the predecessor to FTAA, NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, created in 1993, and now it's over 1,700 pages in length. It resulted in a huge flight of capital out of the United States, most of it going to Mexico. It was sold by Republicans and Democrats as just the opposite. They promised more jobs and increased incomes from the treaty. I recall Rush Limbaugh, another Republican apologist, is claiming the opponents were either isolationists or protectionists. These people, like Limbaugh, engage in telling only one side of the trade issue. Trade among nations both creates jobs and destroys jobs. It has to be fair, or you shouldn't enter into a trade agreement. And certainly it should only be between two countries at a time, not the 34 as proposed by the FTAA. Manufacturing might is the true gauge of a healthy, robust nation. Manufacturing is a direct gauge of a country's military strength. When a country lessens or loses its manufacturing base, it is inviting economic and military attack. Do you think it makes any sense, either militarily or economically, to rely upon manufacturers in foreign lands? Most informed Americans now know that the U.S. is presently dependent upon foreign oil. Most of our imported oil comes not from the Middle East, but from the Western Hemisphere, where one of the main suppliers is Venezuela, a country controlled and headed by a Marxist, Hugo Chavez, who, as a close friend of Fidel Castro, will have a huge role in the formation of the FTAA. If we continue in our military crusades around the world, Bosnia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Korea, Iran, does it make any sense to engage in trade policies that would strengthen foreign nations like China? Should we continue to subsidize American companies who erect factories in foreign lands halfway around the globe? China still considers the U.S. their enemy. These same factories, with the skilled workers who work there, could be used in the future to make military equipment and strategic hardware. The expertise we are giving to these people almost makes obsolete any spying activity on their part. Why should they spy when we give it to them? Have you noticed how much of our merchandise is imported? More than 1/3 comes in from Asia, with China leading the pack. Made in China could almost be called the most popular 3-word phrase in America. Walmart has done almost $18 billion with China. Did you know that China now effectively controls the Panama Canal through a group that operates the canals? China also controls the ports on the Pacific and Gulf of Mexico that ships must enter before using the canal. Earlier last year, one of the last remaining steel manufacturing plants in our nation closed its doors. Geneva Steel in Utah not only closed its doors, but company executives sold the firm's equipment to communist China. The company once employed 8,000 employees. We could use those jobs in Oklahoma right now. And look at how our computer industry is being outsourced. The computer has been a miraculous tool to help all of mankind to produce goods and services at a significantly reduced cost. But in the quest to further internationalize business, must we in the United States abandon our own? What will happen if we rely upon technicians in foreign lands to support our information systems? Is this stupidity? Or is it something else? We are now selling almost 100% of our scrap steel to Red China. Last March, the price of scrap steel went from $161 a ton to $242 a ton in one day. In 1945, we were producing over 50% of the world's steel. Over half of the world's steel. Now we are producing only 15%. We are ruining America to build China. Right now, China and Japan, especially if they were working with their fellow Marxists in Latin America, could cripple the U.S. economically and militarily. Instead of subsidizing these countries with their trade policies that hurt us, we should cut off these disastrous operations, beginning with foreign aid, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the Export-Import Bank. These subsidy programs for foreign nations cost the U.S. taxpayers tens of billions each year. You might ask, why are you talking about Asia? I thought that NAFTA and the FTAA were Western Hemispheric trade issues. My friends, all of these concerns are about our sovereignty and the protection of the United States. It is about the transfer of control of commerce to foreign trade ministers and the increased investment by American corporations in foreign lands. Our suicidal domestic program of burdensome regulation and confiscatory taxation is strangling our economy and local businesses. At the same time, we are making foreign nations more attractive sites for our manufacturers to relocate. We are not only shooting ourselves in the foot, we are allowing the wound to infect the entire body. Is this stupidity? Or is it something else? The regulatory burden is now a staggering 22.4% of the cost of doing business in the United States. In fact, external overhead costs such as taxes, environmental and safety regulations, and litigation add nearly $5 per hour worked compared to our major foreign competitors. No wonder some of our businesses are failing or are venturing overseas. It's easier over there, wherever there is. The open border policy of our federal government is creating a welfare state of illegal immigrants escaping a more socialistic and oppressive government in Mexico and Latin America. The chief exports from California are the shipping containers being sent back to Red China loaded with our scrap steel. Can you believe we are importing timber from Japan? Is this stupidity or is it something else? To quote James Forrestal, Secretary of Defense under President Truman, quote, "Consistency has never been a mark of stupidity. If the diplomats who have handled our relations were merely stupid, they would occasionally make a mistake in our favor," unquote. I haven't even touched on drug trafficking, but just consider vehicular traffic that would be unrestricted into California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, or marine traffic that would be open to the east, west, and southern coast if our borders are erased. Consider the opportunities for drug smuggling or gun running or terrorist infiltration. I don't think it needs any elaboration by me. Is this stupidity? Or is it conspiracy? So what do? Wring our hands and say, "Oh, ain't it awful?" Yeah, some will do that. Run to the hills? Some will do that. Retreat into prayer and contemplative solitude? Some will do that. Listen to talk radio entertainers and the boob tube for their daily fix of misinformation. Yeah, some will do that. Elect more conservatives or liberals who care not a whit about our sovereignty and our beloved Constitution. Some will do that. But some brave souls will do something more effective and permanent. They will join in an organized battle to educate and recruit more loyal Americans like themselves. They will become members of the John Birch Society. These new Birchers will bypass the phony provocateurs of the news media and with us create their own grassroots educational army to turn this country around. We Birchers have organized at the local level opposition to the New World Order with its regional trade agreements. We canvass door to door, motivating our fellow citizens at church, at our business and civic clubs. We distribute quality and always truthful literature warning the good people about the dangers of big government and immorality prevalent at all levels in our society. Our positive, overt action will eventually result in a groundswell of enthusiasm for what is right and good. Then we will start electing bona fide constitutionalists to the House and the Senate and everywhere else. We will become kindred spirits of those brave men and women who 228 years ago pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, like Paul Revere and the others he worked with that notable night. We will wake the town and tell the people of the real dangers that may befall them. By the way, the reason Paul Revere was so successful was that he had organized the people on the route that he rode that night. As a result, they rallied to his call. They knew who he was and they trusted him. He was a neighbor, like all of you. With the help of a nationally organized field staff, we organize petition drives, letter writing campaigns, and speeches like we have here tonight. We are active in the arena of ideas. We will be motivated more by what can be restored rather than worry about what has been destroyed. With our talented authors and publishing facilities, we will return this wonderful country to the grand moral destiny for which she was created. And we will do this by creating understanding and positive enlightenment with the golden torch of the truth. Now, can this rush towards regional global government be stopped? Absolutely. It won't be easy, but it will be certain if we recognize that the U.S. Congress is the key, and we will act accordingly. Know your Constitution. Look at Articles 1, Section 7, 8. Discover that Congress is the key. Do we really want to win? Well, let's start acting like it. Working in your own area with your friends and neighbors. We can be a force nationwide that can turn our congressmen around towards less government. We will restore our lost sovereignty, take back our borders, and stop the excessive taxes and regulations that are destroying our businesses. We will show that government must be the servant and not the master. And we will stop the FTAA and CAFTA, and we will get us out of NAFTA, the WTO, and the UN. Thank you.
There you go, boss.